When I turned into the gravel drive that afternoon, I remember thinking the house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the angle of the sun. Maybe the 2 weeks away had played tricks on my mind. But something about it felt off. The shutters were open at uneven angles. One of Eleanor's rose bushes had been trimmed too short, and the porch light, my porch light, was on in the middle of the day. I cut the engine and just sat there for a moment, listening to the steady tick of the cooling truck engine. 2 weeks away fishing up north should have left me calm. It should have been peace. Instead, the longer I looked at that front door, the heavier my chest felt. 15 days, that's all I'd been gone. Just enough time for the fish to stop biting and for me to start missing my own bed. When I finally stepped out, the scent of new paint hit me before the screen door even opened. I frowned. Brianna must have decided to do some cleaning, I told myself. She was tidy, almost obsessive about appearances. But even then, something in the smell wasn't right. It was too strong, too recent. The hallway was spotless, the carpet freshly vacuumed, but the pictures that had hung there for 25 years were missing. My wedding photo, the one where Eleanor wore that ridiculous flower crown she made herself, was gone. The frame had always left a faint square outline on the wall, like a ghost of memory. Now it was just smooth, blank paint. My voice echoed back at me. Nothing. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet where you can hear the wind through the trees. This was the thick, muffled silence that tells you something's been changed, and nobody bothered to ask. I carried my small duffel toward the living room. The old recliner was gone. So was the grandfather clock that had stood by the fireplace since my father gifted it to us on our 10th anniversary. In their place sat a sleek sectional in some kind of gray fabric, all sharp lines and cold design. A second, I thought I'd walked into the wrong house. They saw Caleb's baseball trophy on the shelf, the one from his high school championship game. I'd refused to dust it for years, insisting it was his job. I smiled at the memory, but the smile didn't stay long. Stiffness sounded upstairs. Dresser with her jewelry box. Gone. The soft peach walls were now a pale gray, the kind you see in hotel rooms trying too hard to look expensive. The lace curtains she'd loved were replaced with blackout drapes. And on the bed, sitting cross-legged in a silk robe, scrolling on her phone like she owned the place, was Brianna. She looked up and smiled, a tight, practiced smile that stopped before reaching her eyes. Wildfires. "Oh, you're back early, Walter." I stood there, gripping the door frame to steady myself. "Early? I told Caleb I'd be home today." Street lazily. "Right, well, surprise." "Surprise?" "We redecorated." She gestured around the room like a hostess showing off a model home. "Do you like it?" "We wanted a more modern look. The old style felt so heavy." For a moment I couldn't find words. The bed. My bed. The one I built the headboard for with my own hands after Eleanor said store-bought ones felt soulless. "Where's my bed?" I asked finally. "Oh, don't worry," she said lightly, brushing imaginary dust from the comforter. "We moved it to the garage. It's safe. You'll be in the guest room from now on. It's cozier. Better for your back at your age." Wireless. She said it softly, but it landed like a slap. I stared at her, studying every line of her smug little smile. It wasn't the kind of grin you give a father-in-law. It was the kind you give someone who's already lost. "You did all this? Without asking me?" Waved her hand. "Caleb said you'd understand. We wanted to surprise you. The place finally feels like home." Home. That word didn't belong in her mouth. I swallowed hard and turned away before I said something I couldn't take back. "Where's Caleb?" "Upstairs," she said. "We've been working nonstop. I'm glad you're back, though. We've got big plans for the house." Plans. I walked down the hallway toward the attic stairs where Caleb's voice drifted down, humming off key like when he was a boy. He looked surprised when I appeared. "Hey, Dad, didn't expect you till tonight." "I said I'd be home today," I repeated, keeping my voice even. "What's going on downstairs?" He looked around, thought, "Then get your own house." Froze. "What?" "You heard me." His mouth opened and closed like he wanted to argue, but no words came out. Caleb, I said quietly, this house isn't just walls and windows. I built it for your mother. Every brick has her fingerprints on it. You don't get to replace that with gray paint and cheap pillows. He looked at the floor. Dad, don't make this a thing, okay? Bree just wanted to surprise you. She means well. Does she? Before he could answer, Brianna's voice floated up the stairs. Everything okay up there? Sluggish Calf winced. Yeah, fine. She appeared a moment later, glass of wine in hand. Walter, let's not start an argument your first day back. You'll love the guest room. I added new bedding. It's perfect for someone who needs rest. Simulations, someone who needs rest. I met her eyes and smiled, the kind of calm smile that hides a storm. Thank you, Brianna. You've done plenty. She seemed satisfied with that and disappeared down the stairs, humming. Classic sighed. Dad, I'm fine, I said. You two enjoy the room. I turned away before he could see the anger burning behind my calm. Downstairs, I stopped at the guest room door. They'd already moved my suitcase there, like they knew I'd have no choice. The room smelled of lavender and detergent, clean, staged, soulless. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a long time. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Somewhere upstairs, laughter echoed, hers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking of Eleanor's voice. Walter, make sure it feels like home, even when I'm gone. I had. For years I had. Until now. Motion light spilled through the blinds. I got up before dawn, my old habit. The coffee maker still sat in the kitchen corner, though someone had replaced the mug set with sleek glass cups. I brewed my coffee and sat at the table, watching the first light touch the rose bushes outside. Half the blooms were gone, cut, trimmed too far back. Steelers as sip of coffee. Bitter. Footsteps means a lot, Walter. I know change is hard for you. Hard for me. Her morning jog, I walked through every room slowly, like I was seeing it for the first time. The furniture might have changed, but the bones of the house were still mine. The floors I'd laid, the walls I'd painted, the beams I'd sanded by hand, they whispered to me like old friends. They'd forgotten one thing. I built this house. I knew every nail, every hidden panel, every place where the wiring ran. As I stood there in the quiet, a strange calm came over me. The anger cooled into something sharper, quieter. They thought they'd taken my room, but I was starting to realize they'd only taken the bait. I lay awake again in the guest room, listening to the muffled sounds from upstairs. Walter's adjusting, Brianna was saying, her voice carrying through the vent. He won't fight it. Caleb murmured something I couldn't hear. Trust me, she said. Soon enough, we'll have the whole place how we want it. I closed my eyes and smiled into the dark. Let them have their fun. Let them think I was old, harmless, tired, because they just declared war on the wrong man, and they didn't even know it yet. The next morning began like every other since my return, quiet, tense, and wrong. The smell of Brianna's perfume had already soaked into the air, clinging to every room like it belonged here. I couldn't walk down the hallway without feeling like a stranger. She'd already left for work by the time I came downstairs. Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table, still half asleep, nursing a cup of coffee that looked far too fancy for him. Some caramel-colored froth on top, not the black brew I'd taught him to drink. Hamilton. Dad, he said without looking up from his phone. Morning, I replied, pouring my coffee the old way. Black, no sugar, no nonsense. We sat in silence for a few moments. The house used to be full of easy talk. Eleanor humming, Caleb laughing, the clink of dishes in the sink. Now it was the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap of his phone screen. Finally, I asked, You going to work today? He nodded. Yeah, Bree's got a half day. She's meeting into the wet cement. This is where we'll grow old. And we did, until she didn't. Standing there, I could almost feel her beside me. It was the first time since coming home that I didn't feel entirely alone. But the peace didn't last. When I came back inside, I saw a sticky note on the fridge in Brianna's perfect handwriting. Walter, we're thinking of updating the porch furniture. I'll show you ideas later. B. I took the note, crumpled it slowly, and tossed it in the trash. She wasn't updating, she was replacing. One piece at a time, she was erasing everything that made this house ours. And Caleb was too blind, or too afraid, to stop her. That night, I decided to start keeping notes of my own. I took out an old ledger from my workshop, the same one I used to record lumber orders when I was still building for a living. Now, it became my journal. Miss Entry number 1. Bliss. Brianna changed my bedroom without permission. Moved my furniture. No written consent. Keep calm. Observe. Entry number 2. She started talking about repainting and replacing porch furniture. No one touches Eleanor's garden. I began writing every detail. Dates, conversations, receipts, anything that might one day matter. Because if I learned anything in construction, it's that foundations only crumble if you ignore the cracks. 3 cracks in this house were widening fast. 2 days later, I came home from the hardware store to find Brianna standing in the living room with a stranger. Some man in slacks holding a clipboard. "Walter," she said too brightly. "This is Greg. He's an interior consultant. We're getting quotes for renovations." "Renovations?" I repeated. "Nothing big," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Just modernizing a few things. Flooring, maybe new countertops. You'll love it once it's done." Blindness, Greg gave me a polite smile. "We'll make sure everything fits your vision, sir." I said slowly, "I don't recall asking for any changes." Brianna laughed, but there was steel behind the sound. "Walter, it's still our home. We're investing in it too." I nodded thoughtfully, then said nothing. Let her think I'd conceded.
Of course.
Justified, and while she thought she was winning, I was working. I went to the county office and requested certified copies of the house deed and property records. I called my lawyer, an old fishing buddy named Harris who owed me a favor, and explained everything. He listened quietly, then said, "So you want to kick your own son out?" "Unrestricted." I sighed. "I want my house back, and I want my son to remember who built it." Reconciliation. "Then we'll do it by the book." By the time I hung up, the first domino was already tilting. Brianna's control tightened over the days that followed. She started leaving grocery lists for me, little reminders about trash days, even suggested I shouldn't mow the lawn because the old mower could be dangerous. Every note, every word chipped away at my patience, but also told me exactly what kind of person she was. The kind who smiled when she took something from you, then told you it was for your own good. Caleb barely noticed. He worked late, came home tired, and let her talk for him. One evening, while they were out, I wandered into their new bedroom. My bedroom. It was spotless, too spotless, the kind of clean that hides guilt. I opened the closet and found Eleanor's quilt stuffed into a plastic bin on the floor, folded carelessly. I knelt, touched the fabric, and for a moment, I saw Eleanor's hands again, small, steady, sewing by the window. "I miss you," I whispered, and as strange as it sounds, I could almost hear her reply. "Then do what you must, Walter, but do it right." Doing it right meant patience. It meant control. So I started acting the part, the tired old man who didn't want trouble. I let Brianna think she was in charge. I let Caleb think he was protecting me from myself. All the while, I was preparing. I called the utility companies, updated the billing information so only my name was listed. I quietly changed the Wi-Fi password and rerouted the mail to my post office box. I even set up a new lock on the workshop, the one door in the house she never dared enter. Inside that workshop, I built my plan, piece by piece. I printed every email she'd sent about renovation approvals. I photographed the chat in the family, my suppressing around the armrest of the chair. So that was her plan. She wasn't content with the room, she wanted the deed, and she was using my son to get it. I sat in the dark long after they went to bed, the quiet ticking of the wall clock echoing in my ears. Eleanor had always said I was too trusting. You build things, Walt, she'd say, but you forget not everyone builds with you. Some just wait to take. She'd been right. Atlanta presented me with a folder at breakfast. Walter, she said sweetly, Caleb and I were thinking, it might be easier if you transferred part of the ownership to us, just for tax purposes. You'd still live here, of course, nothing would change. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. Tax purposes, I said slowly. Exactly. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork, I repeated, smiling faintly. Well, Brianna, I've always believed in reading what I sign. I'll take a look and get back to you. She seemed pleased. Of course, no rush. As soon as they left for the day, I opened the folder. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a transfer of ownership. 50% of the property to Caleb and Brianna. If I signed it, I'd lose control. For a moment, I just stared at the lines, the legal jargon, the way they'd left a space neatly marked. Signature, Walter Jameson. Then I folded it, slid it back into the folder, and placed it neatly on their bed. When they came home that evening, Brianna found me in the living room. So, did you have a chance to review it? I smiled calmly. I did. And? It's an interesting offer, I said, but I think I'll hold off. You see, this house has sentimental value. I'd hate to complicate things. Manslaughter faltered. Walter, you're misunderstanding. No, I interrupted, standing. I understand perfectly. The silence stretched until Caleb stepped in, trying to smooth things over. Dad, we just wanted to help. I know, I said, looking him square in the eye. You've been helping a lot lately. Brianna's jaw tightened. Well, don't say we didn't try. She turned to the county office to register a notice of ownership retention. A quiet conversation with the property appraiser to freeze renovation permits. Shields. By the time Brianna realized the walls were closing in, it would already be too late. But I wasn't rushing. Revenge, like carpentry, demanded precision. You measure twice, cut once, and you never, ever show your hand before the wood splits clean. On the outside, I was still the polite old man who thanked Brianna for dinner and helped Caleb mow the lawn. But inside, I was counting down the days until everything they'd stolen came crashing down around them. Because I wasn't just building a house anymore. I was building a lesson. And when it was done, they'd learn that the foundation they'd tried to claim wasn't just strong, it was unbreakable. By the time I put the ledger back in its drawer that night, the house felt different. Not quieter, not yet, but charged, as if it were holding its breath with me. I've been a carpenter all my life. I knew what a structure could bear and when it would finally creak and settle. The foundations of this family had been tested before. They would be tested again. I sleep like a man who'd finally finished a long, necessary job. Fitful, alert, listening for the smallest sound. When morning came, I rose and moved through the house with slow, deliberate steps. My motions were measured, the same patience I'd practiced at my bench for hours on end, sanding edges until they were smooth. No sudden movements, no angry words. Let them think the old man had given up. Let Brianna keep sipping her wine and rearranging cushions. Let Caleb think his silence was saving him. That afternoon, I called Harris. Bring your suit, I told him, and bring patience. He arrived with the easy grin he always had, like a man who'd fished with you since you were boys and who had seen too many foolish plans to be surprised by anything. He sat at my kitchen table and poured a cup of coffee before he'd even asked what was wrong. So, he said, looking around at the new picture frames, the redecorated mantel. You built something new in here, Walt. Looks modern. Not mine, I said, but that doesn't matter. We need to move. He nodded, the expression in his eyes.
All do we do? I asked. He smiled. The kind that suggested he'd been waiting for that answer. We do it square. We show them the law. We show them the fact. And we make sure they have no oxygen left for their plans. Leg is legs. In 48 hours, we had a 5 thick enough to prop open the door. Scraggled copies of the Guerre, down, tax records, corded bulleted papers. Every day that food that houses laid open on my dining table like a mat. Prepared a letter. Seemed horrible. By a projects. Be practiced notice that pointedly reflected that of living erotic stanglics and legal person. I tagged each page with my full name, Liberate, and they hurried. Legal paperwork was to be a pay at per. Book reclaim at how stubborn, bully. He like, we are confident. And I needed them to be competent, be careless. I let them be. For a week, I played the role of Lord Bland who accepted his fate. Electrically out playing her surprise backyard party. Popped a big her on the throw pillows. Held Caleb load the truck where they bought media equipment for and thanked him for thinking by pun for comfort. Moved along in the pulling out the port in the evenings, making the cup where they were around. When Brianna put clothes to push our social furniture, our clothing hole, I slyly nodded like a man who loved watching his family thrive. Splattered with paper, piling like a fever man walking the circle of the lake. Will they be both careless? Would pride of the play leave at the upper hand. Right. The slaying pot broke. Big up the right pull and the will wrap the pull. With a put great can, added Nolan, with complacently been told. Brian cried the real how willing for granted. A quiet thing that the way of thinking was by the house of there. The light blaming the Collins, truly a pull of friend for the Raiders, so the arrival of the bottle of the blanket. Living earth in a small town that housed every life put the saying probably letting you there.
Neutral. Brianna's smile widened. Isn't it perfect? Imagine what we could do. She reached for my hand in front of everyone, an inhale of ownership. Maybe when Dad's ready. When the guests left and the door clicked shut, celebration still lingered in the air like smoke. I watched them stack the empty bottles in the sink. They were careless, buzzing with their insular triumph, their conversation louder than ordinary. Pride makes people loud. Loud lays bare weakness. That night, went to bed, I wrote in the ledger. Entry number 27. They celebrated. Pride visible. Action tomorrow. The next modus arrived. It was, by design, discreet. No theatrics. Harris had drafted a polite but unmistakable letter, a formal notice to all occupants indicating Walter Jameson as the sole legal owner of the property, a reminder that any changes to ownership required written consent, and an explicit note requesting immediate cessation of any alterations without the owner's authorization. It also included a gentle request, an invitation even, to discuss future plans at Harris's office rather than at the kitchen table. Parmaful found the envelope first, before Brianna could intercept it. He sat on the porch steps, the paper open, his face turning colors in a way that surprised me. "Dad," he said slowly, "what is this?" I came out and sat beside him. The morning was cool. "That's a formal notice," I said. "Harris sent it. Just a reminder of the facts." I watched him read, saw the slow fold of his shoulders as the words took hold. "They'll have to go through proper channels if they want anything changed." He ran a hand through his hair. "Did you have to send it? I mean, we were trying to do right by you." "You were trying to do right by you," I corrected softly, "and that's fine." I looked at him then, really looked, for the first time since my return. "But this house belongs to me." Caleb's jaw worked. "Bry's going to hate this." "She'll get over it," I said. I kept my voice as even as the plank of my workbench. He stayed there for a long time before standing and going inside. Brianna was makeup fine and coffee in her hand, trying to look breezy when she saw me. We sat and talked, and it was the kind of talk that reminded me of teaching him to splice rope. It took patience and control, and the heaviest leaning on the simple facts. I explained the deed, the mortgage history, the taxes. He listened like a man waking from a long sleep, the details pulling his world into a different shape. "I don't want her to think I don't support her," he said finally, at a loss for the words he wanted. "But I can't just sign something I don't understand." "Then don't," I said. If she really cares about us, she'll talk to me. If she's trying to make a play, the truth will out. Negligible. He nodded, and for a moment it felt like the son I remembered. Present, quiet, thoughtful. But the moment passed when his phone lit up. Brianna, I imagined. The tether between them was thin and bright. I called Harris and asked him to prepare the papers that would formalize the house's standing in the county records. A notarized statement of sole ownership, a registered notice that would make any attempts to transfer or mortgage the property visible to third parties. He asked a lot of questions. I answered them all. We talked about how to do it clean, legally, with no dramatic show of force. Victory, I'd learned, tastes better when earned quietly. The next step required a different kind of patience. Everyone, I'd found, prefers to have the last word. They'll press harder if you show signs of flinching. I knew I needed them to push, so I nudged softly and let them take the bait. Bathrooms, thinking she was clever, started leaving little things out. Receipts for new furniture, signed work orders for renovations, a casual note that implied they'd begun the process of selling. She liked to see me squirm. She liked to see me polite, flustered, accommodating. I did not give her the satisfaction. Instead, I documented every piece of paper, took pictures of the replaced fixtures, and copied every email. I made sure there was a record. If she wanted to play paperwork games, I would play better. Then one afternoon, the one I'd been leaning toward like a pole waiting to be felled, she overreached. She had a young couple over, potential buyers, and they were inspecting the house like vultures. I let them move about, watched them calculate the room. That night, when she and Caleb were out, I placed a simple, precise document into the folder on their bed, a draft I'd asked Harris to prepare. It was not an eviction notice, not yet. It was a clear legal notice to occupants specifying that any parties interested in purchasing the property must first be informed that the current listed owner is Walter Jameson, and any transfer would require my explicit, notarized approval. It also included language that would prevent any unscrupulous buyers from making clandestine offers contingent on the prior consent of a co-owner who didn't exist. Innocently on the bed, like a Bible waiting for a sermon. Brianna scowled when she saw it. "What's this?" "A clarification," I said. She slammed the folder shut. "You're making this difficult." "No," I said. "I'm making this clear." My voice was calm. I had no intention of being cruel. I intended only to be precise. She stormed out, and for the first time since I'd come home, she called her mother in a fury. They argued in the kitchen. The conversation was heated, full of the kind of words people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're in the right. I listened from the living room and let them have their hissed syllables. Harris came by the next morning with a small group of his office colleagues, men and women who knew how to read deeds like one reads grain in wood. They came prepared, their faces polite, their manner official. They went through the house, noting the changes, comparing dates, verifying signatures, and finally, when the work was done, they placed a simple yellow paper in the county registry, a notice of ownership. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply there, a legal light on the ledger. The ripple was immediate. Anyone who looked up the property would find the notice. Any buyer or bank would see the legal clarity. This house was mine. When Brianna learned of it, she raged. She called me names I'd heard whispered in bars and shouted on football sidelines. Her voice echoed like glass in the hall. Caleb stood between us, torn, hands shaking. "You did this to me," she said. Her face was wet with fury, and I realized then the true extent of her vanity. She believed the house should bow to her because she had the nerve to redecorate. "I did this to protect what is mine," I said. "I did this to movements, their frantic voices, the slam of the trunk. They all felt like the kinds of things people do when they realize the castle they'd tried to claim has a moat they never noticed." Brianna came to me before they left. Her eyes were rimmed red. "You'll regret this," she warned. "Vaughn," I said quietly. "You'll understand." Season, Connick. They drove away, not in a fit of melodrama, but in the silent, efficient way of people who had decided to cut their losses. Caleb sat in the driver's seat while Brianna directed him. Her lipstick smudged, pride deflated. "Shields." I watched them go for a long time. When the truck vanished around the bend, I felt an odd emptiness. Not guilt, not triumph, just the simple recognition that this was the moment the tide would turn. The house sighed with me, a sound like settling dust. Immigration. I walked to the upstairs door and pulled it open. The gray paint glowed faintly in the dusk. The mattress they'd left behind, not mine, not yet, sagged a little where an afternoon of sun had warmed it. I opened the closet and donned my work shirt with slow reverence, like a man putting on armor. That night, when the house was filling playing armor, flooring when the house was finally quiet, I went upstairs and stood in the room that had been mine and watched the moonlight pool on the floor. I found Eleanor's old sewing box, the one I thought was long gone, tucked behind a stack of the white pillows. I opened it and found a needle, a spool of thread, a scrap of fabric with a faded pattern. I held it to my face and breathed. "You did good, Walt," I said to the darkness. "You did what's right." Shimmer. Outside, a distant car passed. Inside, the house settled with the kind of contented creak houses make when they finally rest on secure ground. I sat for a long time, ledger in hand, the entries neat and calculated like the lines on a blueprint. There were more legal steps to take, more records to shore up, and a conversation with Caleb yet to be had, the kind that might heal or burn what remained. But the most important part was done. The immediate threat had been defanged without a fight, without violence, without humiliating theatrics. They'd left not because I'd yelled or... When morning came after they left, the light in the bedroom felt different, softer, like it was settling back into place. The house had been quiet for a while that wasn't empty. It hummed with a sense of permission, as if every floorboard that had remembered 100 small footprints was approving a decision finally made. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, watching dust motes float across the place where our mahogany bed had once sat, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself feel something that wasn't fury or plotting. I felt relief. The first order of business was practical. The bed. I knew the garage where they'd stashed it. I'd seen the truck leave with a boxy outline through the mirror that morning. I dug into the shed and pulled the keys to the old pickup I'd kept for weekend jobs, the one with the rust along the wheel wells and the seat patched with duct tape. It was comforting in an honest way. It started on the third crank. I loaded the mattress into the back like it was treasure and drove the sunlit lane with the kind of slow satisfaction that comes with making a right move. When I rolled the mahogany frame back into the bedroom and set it where it belonged, everything snapped into place. I ran my hand along the headboard, felt the small gouge Eleanor left one summer when she dropped a gardening shears by accident, and smiled. The room breathed. The air itself seemed to relax. I opened the wardrobe and hung Eleanor's dresses back up, the floral patterns catching the light just so. I stood there for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. Pipes shifting, the old heater clattering to life after a long rest, the quiet tick of the clock on the mantel that had been gone from the living room for a month and now sat back in its old spot. Restoration is less about fixing timber and more about righting a balance. That day I felt a balance returned. Weeks passed in the small, steady way of chores and rituals. I repainted a wall the soft peach Eleanor had loved, matching a scrap of paint I'd kept folded inside a drawer like a relic. I hunted down a few of the missing photographs, swapped mistakenly into boxes of donations, and rehung them. The garden responded. The roses, a little shocked at first by neglect, began to unfurl again with the coaxing of my pruning. Couldn't turn my back. When he arrived, he stood by the driveway like a man bracing for a storm. He was thinner, the edges of his face harder, as if the late nights and worry had carved into him. He had the awkwardness of someone who wanted to apologize, but hadn't yet found the exact words. We sat on the porch swing, the same tired wood that squeaked happily under both our weights. For a long while we didn't speak. The sound of the road and the distant cough of a passing tractor filled the lull. Flooring, he spoke. "Dad, I messed up." The admission came out small, honest. He didn't try to soften it. He didn't try to lie about it. You let her do it, I said evenly. You thought you were protecting someone. You weren't the only one at fault. He rubbed his hand over his face and laughed, a short, bitter sound. I didn't see it. I wanted to believe someone wanted to help. I didn't want to fight. I thought I was doing the right thing. You were trying to avoid a fight, I said. Sometimes avoiding a fight is the fight. You pick your battles, Caleb. You decide what's worth holding on to. You also decide who you want to be when it's all over. My voice didn't aim to wound, it aimed to reach him. He stayed like that for a while, looking out at the yard as if it might provide an answer. She's gone. She took her things and left town. Said she couldn't be here after the notice. She's with her mother now, probably plotting some way to make it hard. Let her plot, I said. People who build on quicksand find out too late that there's nothing to stand on. He looked at me then, and there was a softness in his face that I hadn't seen since he was small, and scraped his knee by the dock. Can we fix it? The house? Maybe I can help. By listening, I said. Help with the garden. Take the trash to the curb. Be honest with yourself. It was less about doing chores than about being present, about proving to me and to himself that he could be trusted again, not because of a legal document, but because of small, steady acts. He stayed for 2 days. He helped repair the fence post that had rotted, painted the back steps, and carried buckets of compost to the rose beds. We worked in companion answer. It's a funny thing about small towns. Gossip runs on a different current than truth. It can move fast and bury things in a way facts never can. I kept my head down. Harris had prepared for me the papers I needed to keep the legalities tidy. Updated title filings, a small trust that guaranteed the house's upkeep, and a provision ensuring that the house could not be sold or mortgaged without my express consent. It felt redundant at times, but the law is a tool like any other. You sharpen it and you use it. A week later, a letter arrived. It was a formal notice. Brianna's attorney had sent it, all sharp edges and legal cadence. They'd accused me of harassment, of unjust deprivation of marital rights, whatever that meant, and demanded mediation. The letter dripped with indignation, and it was signed with the kind of flourish that had once belonged to her mother, a woman I only met a handful of times. The accuser wanted the court to rule quickly, to set an injunction. It was the sort of thing people do when they have the wealthy conviction that money and noise can bulldoze truth. Harris read it and smirked. They've got a good writer, he said, but not a case. We'll respond, calmly, firmly, and we'll remind the court of the deeds. We filed the response, not with spite but with evidence. Photographs, dates, receipts, notarized statements from neighbors who'd seen the renovations being done without my consent. The legal world is a different kind of workshop. The tools are words and precedent, but the work can be just as exacting. If a man wants to keep what he built, he must sometimes hold a hammer and a pen. The hearing date was set 2 months out. In that time, the house needed more than legal housekeeping. It needed mending. I fixed the swing on the porch that creaked in protest each time someone sat. I recushioned the reading chair with new batting. I made the guest room into something pleasant where visiting nieces might stay, not as a consolation prize for me, but as a place of welcome. I started hanging a few small, tasteful signs of life. A potted fern by the sink, a knitted throw Eleanor had once made over the arm of the couch. Missions started to notice. Mrs. started to notice. Mrs. Carter next door, who'd always been a touch judge, the one with the faint stain near the cuff from when Eleanor spilled tea during our first Christmas without the children. And I kept it, because some stains are honorable. Harris walked me through what would happen. We'll be factual, he said. We'll make it simple. They'll shout, we'll show the ledger. Courts like clarity. The room in the county courthouse smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. People filtered in like moths to a porch light, some curious, some disinterested, a few with the piety of town officials who love being called to witness a spectacle. Brianna sat at the opposite table, her shoulders high, eyes glassy with a kind of righteous anger she'd turned into armor. Her mother was there too, an expression that said she was equal parts indignant and personally affronted. Jailed Harris's Tedar case. Harris's voice was steady. He was like a foreman pointing out the integrity of a structure. I handed over the ledger, the photocopies, the notarized records, and the photos. I testified, simply, plainly, about what had happened and how I'd tried to be reasonable. The judge, a woman who looked as if she'd wrestled 1,000 disputes into submission, listened with the patience of someone who sees human folly every day. Her questions were short and to the point. Insurance. In the end, the court ruled as the truth often does when given a light. The deed was clear. The attempts at transfer without proper consent were made in haste and with questionable intent, and the notice of ownership stood. The judge recommended mediation for the family to try and repair relationships, but she made the law clear. The house remained mine. There was applause from one corner of the room, quiet, respectful. It felt small and perfectly adequate. Brianna's mother sputtered and left. Brianna, for the first time that day, looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the courtroom. Insurance. We didn't gloat. We didn't need to. After the ruling, I walked out into the light and felt the sun on my face like a blessing. The house didn't scream victory. It simply waited, steady as a heartbeat. The roses outside seemed to lean a little toward the light. After the hearing, Caleb and I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee between us. We said things that needed saying, and also kept some vase Eleanor once had, looking at them like they were fragments of someone else's life she'd only ever wanted to embellish. I owe you an apology, she said, voice thin. I wanted a life that felt like it belonged to me immediately. I thought I could smooth things over later. I was selfish. She cried a little then, the sort of wet, honest thing that loosens the knots in people. I listened. It was not a clean forgiveness. It was a beginning. I told her I forgave her for some things, and that for others there would be time, work, and proof. She left the items and kissed Caleb's cheek with a softness that surprised me. They stayed in town, found a small rental, and started over in a quieter, more honest way. Not everyone in our story got knuckled back into place, and not every scar healed. Pride leaves marks in people, and sometimes those marks guide them away from you for good. I learned that victory is not always about seeing a person humbled. Sometimes it's about holding steady enough that the people you love can choose to come back on their own. There were nights I still cite my work down, back in the treatments. There were nights I still sat into them to the resonance of the time. There's no other work since soon. There were nights I still sat into their resonance of the work. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of carvage. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. There were nights I still sat into the resonance of the treatments. That victory is not always about seeing a person humbled. Some were nights I still sat at the kitchen table and felt the hollow where trust had been. There were afternoons I'd hear a comment from a neighbor about how brave Walter was, and I'd smile without fully believing the accolades. The real work, the thing that made the house whole, was ordinary. I fixed the gate latch when it wobbled. I taught Caleb how to sharpen a chisel properly. We planted a new series of roses along the fence, hardier stock this time, and tended them together. The house, which had taken on the fear and the claim of two young people, soft sound of home around me, knowing I had kept what mattered and that, when needed, I would stand there again to remind the world that some things aren't for taking.